welcome to Served Up. This podcast is where hospitality meets leadership and where we take an honest look at the business of beverage. I'm Bridget Albert. I've spent my career building cocktail programs, mentoring rising talent, judging competitions, and advocating for women in our industry. I'm joined by my co-host, Eric Heemer, one of only 5 people in the world to hold both the Master Sommelier and Master of Wine titles. His depth of knowledge and global perspective brings tremendous insight to every conversation. This is Served Up.
Hello, everyone. This is Eric speaking. Bridget has the day off, so Kyle is my co-host. Today's guest is a multi-talented California entrepreneur named Bobby DeMars. Bobby is the founder of Blind Barrels, a blind whiskey tasting subscription that showcases American craft distilleries that rarely get the shelf space they deserve. The COVID-19 quarantine brought about blind whiskey tastings with friends, and DeMars saw an opportunity for a startup unlike any other in the beverage alcohol industry. In addition, DeMars is an award-winning filmmaker whose experience as a college football player ultimately led to his documentary film, The Business of Amateurs, in 2016, which took on the NCAA's exploitation of college athletes and the prevalence of brain trauma inherent to college football. So pour yourself a spot of your favorite whiskey, pull up a chair, and enjoy the show. Thank you. Welcome to Served Up. I'm Eric, and we've given Bridget the day off today, so sitting in for Bridget is Kyle McHugh, who is truly a whiskey expert, an expert on all things spirituous, actually, and we're really, really happy to have Bobby DeMars here, who's the founder of Blind Barrels. Hi, Bobby. Welcome to Served Up.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Really, really happy to hear you. I've been reading up on your very fascinating life story, and we do want to talk about Blind Barrels. But before we talk about that, I'd love to go back to the past a little bit. I find your past is as interesting as your present. So if you don't mind, let's take a step back in time and talk a little bit about your beginning. Like, where were you born? Where did you grow up? What football team did you idolize when you were a kid?
So I grew up in the San Fernando Valley in Woodland Hills, just like Paul Thomas Anderson, who won the Oscar recently, and the product of the Valley, son of an inventor, actually. So I was around a guy that was just taking risks during my entire upbringing. He had over 200 patents in his life, which was, I'll tell you, getting one patent is really hard, and just really saw the ups and the downs and just the anxiety up close. I remember it very much, and that's either going to make you want to take risks or make you never want to take risks. As far as football, I wasn't really a big football watcher. I was more into the Oscars than I was the Super Bowls. But, I did end up playing college football at USC, and I had some cousins that went there. And I remember my freshman year, I was like, I was 6'3", 145. I had never played football before. I just played freshman football. And they said, well, let's put some goals down. And, like benching this and this many times and running a 40 and like a 4.9 or something like that. And then they said, well, what about an overall goal? And I was like, okay. And then I said, football scholarship to USC. And I was like, okay, put that at the top. Right. Mm-hmm. And from that moment, exactly 2 years later, I had a full football scholarship offer to USC. Mm-hmm. So it was a really good idea of, visualizing something that really could become a reality and showing how small goals can lead to bigger goals. And then it really changed the trajectory and how I approached a lot of things later on in life.
Yeah, very, very true. And I imagine that most young men that play top-level NCAA football have dreams of making it all the way to the NFL. Was that true of you, or did you value the education more highly?
No, I was very much more of an academic person than I was an athlete, before football. Then, I want to take that financial burden off my parents. So, of course, I'm not going to deny taking a football scholarship. What I didn't account for was that it'd be a full-time job. But I was in the business scholars program, which meant I got into the business school as a freshman at USC. I was the first player to get into film school there. There definitely was conflict with my coaches in that I had a guy named Ed Ogeron who was he was my D, about him that publicly, but he asked me out when I had to leave practice early to go to class, and he thought I cared more about school than football. The reality is I want to be successful in anything that I'm doing, and if it wasn't for Pete Carroll coming in, I would have never started there. But by the time I got done, in the 5 years that I was at SC, I really played like probably 12 years with the football because there was a period where I was expendable. So I'd have to go every snap, and we didn't have 2 days. We had 3 days for like 24 days straight, and there was stretches where I would go every snap in practice, or I'd go 80 plays in a row in a scrimmage. And so it definitely affected my mental health. I think, you can push yourself beyond the brink and physically and mentally. And it really kind of pushed me to not want to be a cop, to be under control. So it did end up playing a little bit into the origin story of, I did internships with big companies, and I didn't like corporate culture. And it very much felt in the same way that, man, there's a lot of politics and sports and this. And basically, when somebody's in charge of you, there's only so much you can control. And I didn't like that. So I kind of thwarted the traditional go work at a company, go work your way up the company, go work towards a brass ring, all of that. And so out of college, I've been an entrepreneur ever since I graduated. But no,
That's
I didn't have any
interesting.
NFL aspirations. I mean, I didn't even go to the NFL combine. I started my senior year, but I kind of wanted to I really just wanted to be a student for a semester, which is what I did.
Right.
Wanted to be a college student. I went out every night. I mean, I made some of my best friends and allies were that last semester.
Yeah. I'm glad you got to have that true college experience that every kid craves. That's great. And it's interesting that you mentioned early on that you weren't really a football fan when you were a kid. You were more into the Oscars. So sooner or later, you're going to get your way into filmmaking eventually. And that's exactly what happened. So tell us a little bit about your first documentary. It had nothing to do with football. Is that right?
Yeah, the first documentary I made, so I was a part of a production company. We did a film called Talk to Me, which was kind of the first African American art house film before. I think Precious really gets the credit for that and breaking the mold
Mm.
and the dynamics in terms of the demographics that actually went out to see that. They weren't making films like that back then. So it had Martin Sheen, Taraji Henson, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Casey Lemons directed, who's gone on to have a pretty big career. And, Focus Features, which is the kind of specialty division of Universal, did a lot of script worked on that, like saved the life rights in the project. I was really producing in every capacity. Lost my credit 2 weeks before production because I didn't have strong enough lawyer to keep that from happening. And then the documentary that we made that PBS eventually distributed, Adjust Your Color, The Truth of Petey Green, which Don Cheadle narrated. And we won the audience award for that, which was really great. And yeah, I mean, that was an interesting production. We shot 5 days in one city. And, we had the editor from Whoop Dreams, and which I had to fire because he went off the rails and didn't do any of the stuff we wanted to do. And then, that was just seeing, I'll tell you, seeing my dad breathe life into ideas. That was kind of really the first instance where, from boots to ground. And I'd taken risks up to that point, and I'd started things, but I'd never really just fully seen something come to fruition and like manifest something, right? And then just the pride that comes with that, and even just the legacy. I mean, creating a work of art is something that can be there after you're gone. But that was a great, experience. And yeah, there's actually Rick Ross option, like, or he bought the rights to a clip from the documentary that he put in one of his songs. So that was kind of cool. Later on, it happened. Just, I'm a hip hop fan.
Yeah,
Um,
very, very cool. So that was in 2009, if I'm not mistaken?
yeah, that came out in
2009.
2009. I think it was distributed.
And so you were successful in your first venture as a producer, and obviously that's whet your appetite for more. Tell us a little bit about the business of amateurs.
So I became disillusioned with my partners at the time. I think we had different motivations for why we wanted to be storytellers, and everybody can talk about what those are for them as individuals. But for me, I always loved the idea of just literally just telling stories, and the idea of legacy. Once again, you can have a legacy by having a kid, right? But you can also have it by creating something that can stand the test of time, whether through a company or work of art or various capacities. And so I was tired of waiting for a movie to get made because it's so hard to get a film made. People don't really understand the lightning in the bottle. You got to develop 50 things. I had a brother-in-law that would always be like, "So are you giving up this whole film thing?" Like every few years. And I'm like, all right, dude, you didn't see the pilot that failed, and you didn't see the deal. You don't know all the things that didn't happen. And so I was like, I can control this. This is something I know about, which is college athletes' rights. And it's something that I feel like, deserves an introspective look from somebody that actually lived it, and have all the acumen in the backdrop. It's kind of like Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, where like, all these components of me, it's like I'm really set up to tell this story, and really set out to make a feature that was focused on really the disparity in the gap that exists between people that make the money and the players that are essentially commodities and are limited from what they can make. So that was the main focus of it. But then as I started making it, I realized quickly that this was a film about rights and about academic integrity. These guys are steered into majors. It's about, eligibility. It's not really about getting an education, and ultimately CTE and these guys that are trading their long-term mental health for these ephemeral moments of glory. And so I really made 3 movies that I had to put into 1 movie because I couldn't sell 3 movies.
Mhm.
And we shot 77 days in 23 cities for about $22,000. It was super just bare bones, and it was a very difficult film to make just because what it took to pull off. And then when you take on a big topic like that, the hardest thing with any film, because I produced it, I directed, and I wrote it. A lot of people go, "Oh, you wrote the film? What does that mean?" Like, they think that the editor just takes all the footage and turns it into a movie, but what you have is a bunch of transcripts. I had 3,000 pages of transcripts. So imagine you have 3,000 pages of a book, but sentences are out of order, and then you need to actually put all of those sentences into in order in 40 pages. So writing it was one of the most difficult things. The editor's job is really energy and flow and just different hurdles of just I used 270 things in the film that I didn't have the rights to.
Mm.
So to get somebody to sign off on that without having to pay $80,000 for it, just getting errors and omission insurance at the tail end, which happened 5 days before my daughter was born. I mean, there was all these stressful things that happened with that. And luckily, the film did really well. It was the number one doc on iTunes for several months. It played a role. We set out to change the system, and we were one of the elements that was a part of it. So I was on the oversight committee for the nonprofit that created the NIL laws, so name, image, and likeness. And we passed it in California, got it replicated in other states who then fast tracked it. And then the Supreme Court, literally overnight, and 5 minutes of my film played at all the state Senate hearings with the Supreme Court. So was very proud that we were one of the elements that played a role in that.
Yeah, that's fantastic and an incredible accomplishments. And let's talk about that for a moment. So, NIL is name, image, likeness for those of you that aren't familiar with the term. And tell us about what this did for college athletes, Bobby.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I thought for sure that we were going to get laws passed upon academic integrity. Like in North Carolina, they set up system for paper classes where they would, forced mostly African American studies, made mainly African American student athletes into African American studies, and then they wouldn't teach them that. African American studies is really a study of oppression and overcoming it, and they didn't teach them that, and they failed to see the irony of that. I thought there would be kind of guardrails put in place for that, or guys that in terms of doing hit counts, and the concussions are one thing; it's really subconcussive blows. I thought we were going to get legislation passed for that, and we actually tried, and we did. I actually spent a whole year creating a health plan. If you think about like ways to change the system, you can do litigation, you can do legislation, unionizing. There was all these roadblocks for that. But the fastest way to do it is competition, right? So when we passed that bill in California, that it was going to take 3 years for that to actually be implemented. Florida fast tracked it and did it in a year. So one of the things that I tried to do, I spent a whole year actually creating a health plan that would cover every athlete at the school in every sport, including walk-ons, for the injuries they sustained in their sport that year for the next 60 years. So when you're in your 40s and your 50s and you got to redo your knee surgery, right, or your elbow or any of this stuff, and it was not easy getting that. But then they said, I met with USC because I was like, hey, you guys could be the heroes. And ultimately, you're making all these promises. I'm going to take care of your kid in terms of like their physical health and their well-being as well as their academics. I'm going to take care of them. But you never really followed through with that. And this is a way for you to follow through with that. And this will get other schools to do it. And then my friend passed away while we were making the film. And I was kind of mad at SC. And I was, kind of like, you don't get to be the hero in the sense. But I did try to get it through. They stopped me at compliance, even though they didn't reinterpret the bylaws. They didn't know about that, but I did. And then you had to get through the football, board, and then the athletic department board, and then the university, and then at the time the Pac-12. So they set all these hurdles in front of me, and I'm like, all right, well, give me the compliance guy. And then for NIL, I mean, name, image, and likeness. Basically, these guys are, they never their greatest market value in life is when they can't trade on it. A lot of these guys don't have pro careers, and at the time, it was really controversial when I was making the film because people were like, well, I've got student debt and this guy gets a free scholarship. And I'm like, yeah, but he's worth more than that,
Yeah, yeah.
and we don't have a problem paying child actors or even you put a dog on a billboard, dog gets paid. But that we've created this interesting element in that this, supposed purity that exists in college sports when no, the coaches are well paid. I mean, they used to be professors, but when TV revenue became a part of it and the schools became cartels because they can control the supply by limiting the value and the pricing of what they're worth, right? And that's exactly what a cartel is. And so, the fact that players, and it's not even saying paying players, players are getting paid, they're getting a piece of the profits now, it's now matriculated into that. But the idea that, wait, I can't, like, you can sell my jersey, but I can't. And that's somehow, I mean, amateurism started as a separation of class. The bourgeoisie they didn't want the working man who was working 6, 7 days a week to best them in their leisure, right? It was literally started purely as a separation of class. The Olympics and, Pierre Coubertin that came in, like, modeled it after the ancient Olympics. Ancient Olympics didn't have amateurism. Like, if you, won a race back in ancient Greece, like, you didn't have to pay for Uzo the rest of your life. Everybody was well taken care of and they were celebrated. And you can look at various stages of amateurism where it's been abused, and, college athletics is one of them. And there's an element of not racism, but racial preference that takes place for sure when it comes to the way that people look at, oh, well, this kid's lucky that he has anything without that. And it's like, okay, and ultimately the subsidization of all these Olympic sports that, if you're going to go play club soccer, families are going to pay sometimes more than they do for the kids' college education, just to play that club sport, just so they can then get a scholarship that the family could already afford anyway. So there's definitely some socioeconomic disparity or, difference between the families and this thing like that. We don't get into that. That's the thing, is I could have made a 9-part Ken Burns series on it, but I couldn't sell that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you sound very humble about the accomplishments, but it's truly remarkable. And collegiate athletes everywhere, owe you a huge debt of gratitude for what you were able to accomplish with
Send me
all this.
3%. Just send me 3%.
It's pretty amazing. So, do you have another idea for a film in the works anytime soon?
Yeah, I mean, I have films. I always say I've got like a pinky in the industry. There's always some TV project or there's something that's going on behind the scenes. But I have a couple scripts that have some big attachments to them. And the reality is, I just don't get, I'd love to get excited about it, but I know how crushing and debilitating it is when you have hope for something that doesn't work out. I saw with my dad firsthand. Oh my God, we got this thing right around the corner. It doesn't happen, and it crushes you, and you can't do the other thing. So while these other things are hopefully happening, I'm going off and I'm doing this. And, I'm working on another, app right now for something that's completely and wildly different than any of the things, but it is built into sports world. So I'm always kind of doing something, making sure I'm not spread thin, making sure that I'm still, a good father and a good husband. And, I put those are my main rocks that I put in first. And then, yeah, My Other Babies, which is, the films that I've made. But it's so hard to get a film made, and people don't really understand, like, lightning in a bottle. Like, so you can go make an independent film, you can go find money. That doesn't mean you'll get distribution. And if you get distribution, it means people will see it. I mean, you run the risk of making a very expensive home film,
I can
and
imagine.
it's daunting at various stages.
Hmm. Very interesting. Well, that was a nice little teaser. So we may expect to see something else coming out from you in the near future, and perhaps not. We'll just have to wait and see which way the wind blows on that one. But I'd like to transition over and talk about blind barrels, and I think this is a great time to bring Kyle into the discussion. Kyle, would you like to step in and talk
Absolutely.
to Bobby?
So Bobby, how did you get into the spirit side and the drink side of the world? I mean, you've solved all these problems, or at least taken a stab at really complex structures of and not only navigating them yourself, but also then trying to find ways to mitigate some of the, I don't know, damage is the right word, but to help alleviate where some things could be better, right, for the people that are part of them. And so we've heard about movies and we've heard about apps and some of the other projects that, that you've been able to do since leaving USC. And you've got this incredible whiskey project that Eric and I have been lucky enough to try in Blind Barrels. But tell us a little bit, what got you interested in whiskey and then the origin of Blind Barrels?
So just like your guys' podcast, Blind Barrels was a COVID baby. And, so I've my main bread and butter the last 20 years, actually, I've run an education company, started out working in mentoring and tutoring foster kids for some nonprofits and kind of grew that, built the whole education thing for mindfulness test prep, college application, essay storytelling. It's been my bread and butter for the last 25 years. It allows me to take all these other risks, right? Well, during COVID, that died. All the film project development, those died. Okay, we got some PPP money. Great. Maybe a little unemployment. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. You can do that. I'm like, okay, I'll take a little bit of employment money. And then, it was a couple of months, and I did it for like 2 months, and, painted some accent walls, installed some bidets. And then I'm like, okay, I'm like antsy. I'm like, like if I won the lottery, I wouldn't stop working. I would need to do something. And my buddy was doing blind tastings during COVID. And I had done it with wine before. I'd never done it with whiskey before. So in my mind, I never really thought about whiskey being that nuanced. And, 8 samples. I went through it. I couldn't believe how wild and different they were. I didn't know what made a bourbon or what made a rye or anything like that. And I called my buddy after the second one that he did. I said, "This feels like a business." And he said, "Yeah, okay." And I said, "Nobody's ever done this before. Nobody's ever done a blind tasting." And I quickly figured out why. I called up a ABC alcohol beverage control attorney. And here's just a great live pro tip. You can call any attorney, usually get an hour-long consultation with them, usually without having to pay them, because you're kind of vetting them out to see if you want to hire them or not. And it lasted 7 minutes because he was like, "There's 8 federal laws you're trying to break." And I'm like, "Okay, I just take the whiskey, open in a bottle, send it out to people." He's like, "You can't. No, you can't. There's a 3-tier system." And so I had to kind of go research, 3-tier system, what does that mean? How did that happen? And then I did 17 more free hour-long consultations with different ABC attorneys, and eventually hired one that I could afford, and then eventually hired the one that really broke open the door and came up with the way to do it, but I couldn't afford because it wouldn't have worked in the way that we raised the money. So we came up with, I actually know about 4 or 5 ways to do it. Right now we're doing the one that's the most optimal way, but it's difficult. You got to have the right relationships and the right partnerships to get other people's whiskey into your bottles. Like, I'm not licensed to do that. So we have to have all the critical partnerships to do that. And the other thing I'd say that, goes in line with, my past and the way I've made films and working with foster kids is we weren't going to focus on big brands. We were going to focus on craft. We didn't think there was anything special about putting, Maker's Mark and Jack Daniels. Not that they don't make great product, but that it's really accessible. And there's 3,000 distilleries across the country that people haven't heard of. And yeah, distribution plays a big role in that, in terms of who gets shelf space, especially on premise. There's a big stranglehold for, brands that are on the shelf, and for good reason. But then also there's brands that just exist in their native state and you can't get them. And so these brands that people can't even buy or try, okay, well, let's say you tell them about the brand. People aren't going to try it because they're making decisions based upon price, on what it looks like, and the label, and there's all these decisions that go into it. So, like, let's remove all the bias. Let's put the focus on education and discovery. I would say we're not a whiskey company, we're an experience company. And what we're trying to do is provide something that is not just fun, engaging, and educational, but something that's communal, something that allows you to be mindful and connected in the present moment with the company that you're with, and create a memory. And so the first thing I do, whether it's making a film or a brand, the first thing I do is create a logo. You always create the logo, you always create the movie poster, you create a sizzle reel, you make something that's tangible so that it's just not an idea that's out in the ether, right? It makes people believe that this is going to happen. And I didn't go raise money. What I did was I pitched people that I trust and whose acumen or experience is something that, just to get feedback. And I would pitch them the idea. And 14 out of the 15 said, "If there's a chance for me to invest, let me know." And so didn't raise a lot of money, actually. Only raised about $150,000, mainly because I'd never done e-commerce before. I also knew how risky it was to try to pull off what we're going to be doing, creating any brand, getting into a beverage space, getting into a heavily restricted space like spirits. Beer and spirits are the hardest. Wine's way easier, in terms of the laws and all the stuff that you can do. And so spent all of 2021 getting all those critical partnerships, building the site, getting the branding, the steampunk monkey that you see on the box and everything like that. That was the first thing that I created. Got that logo done for like $300, and then hired that guy to just go in and built out the other 100 iterations that happened for the shirts and, the tasting glasses and all that other stuff. Made custom glass, made custom caps, custom packaging. I'll tell you what, building a box and a custom packaging, the shipper box. There's all these components that I've never dealt with physical products like that before. And so, yeah, every day with any venture that you start there's a lot of anxiety, and you wake up at 4 a.m. with problems that you can't solve. And I still have those days. I still have those mornings. I still have tough times. And I also try to just have moments of gratitude where, hey, look at what we've created and look how far we've come. And so we launched in 2022, first quarter, did a lot of grassroots stuff, just a lot of friends stuff. Luckily, we partnered with a local radio DJ. My friend just had me friends with him, and he's the #1 FM morning DJ in Southern California. And we do a weekly radio show with him every week called Four Whiskeys on his mycraft.com station that streams for like 30 million hours, listening hours throughout the month. And that, eventually you saturate that audience, but he talked about us on the radio all the time, and that really gave us a good push. And we're a subscription model, but we're really a membership model. So people aren't just getting blind tasting sent to their door. And it's double blind. So single blind is, I know what these are, I just don't know the order they're in. A double blind, you don't know anything until you reveal. And the QR code, there's actually a game that we built so you can guess the age, the proof, the type of whiskey, and you'll get a score that tells you how accurate your palate is. And then there's the reveal. So not just the age, the proof, the type, the backstory, the distillery, the fun facts, being able to purchase a full bottle for less than if you were at the distillery yourself. That's probably one of the best values of the membership itself. We've got a bunch of allocated bottles that we just got from Southern that we're going to be putting into a thing called Bobby Stash. So our members are going to be able to get just really killer bottles without markups. We have other competitors in the space. I think they mark up the bottles, and we wanted to make sure that, look, hey, when you're buying a bottle, you're really supporting the brand. You're not supporting us. You're going to support us by staying with us and the curation and the FOMO that comes with what's in the next lineup.
Yeah. I have to say, Bobby, having received one of your kits, again, thank you. Having just gone through it, the packaging is great. It looks expensive. The bottles are beautifully crafted. I love the packaging. I love the steampunk monkey logo. The tasting table is fantastic. It's so much fun. It's so colorful. And it reminds me a lot of the UC Davis, wheel that we use in wine tasting, but, with its own unique spirits terminology. And it's really cool. It's a great kit. So you really hit a home run with the packaging. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the subscription works if somebody wants to subscribe?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thank you for the compliment on the packaging. It was really important that people associate these small brands with top shelf, because in many cases they are. So if you go to blindbarrels.com, there's really three options that are of the same type of SKU. So there's a one-off purchase if you don't want to buy a membership. We do have a Fred Minnick kit that just went live just now. So Fred Minnick's kind of one of the most well-known whiskey critics and authors. He just came out with a new book called Bottom Shelf that really he has a really interesting, amazing story and a dark past, and whiskey kind of led him to this other light. So quarterly memberships every quarter, so if you, join now, we send you a kit now, and then we dial the renewal. So you get the kits every quarter. The annual, you're prepaying for 4 quarters. So we get you 4 tasting glasses. We get you also a fit bonus kit when you sign up. And then everybody gets the same lineup at the same time. So a lot of subscription companies are set up where, like, let's say I join, a keto club or a candy club. It's like they'll throw a bunch of stuff in a box and they'll send it out to you. But it's not communal in the sense that everybody's getting the same thing and getting the same thing at the same time. So we have drops. So, yesterday we had, we're in the middle of one of the 7 pallets went out. We got another 2 that are getting picked up later today. 5,000 kits that are, going all over the place. So everybody gets the same kit at the same time, so that when someone has a friend or a brother or a mother or sister or whatever, a coworker across the state, across the country, everybody gets the same lineup at the same time so they can do the tasting. And then we do live tastings. We do 2 every quarter with everybody. We do giveaways. We try to make ourselves as accessible as possible. If you email customer service, you're going to get me. I'm going to do that for as long as I can. I think that's we built a whiskey community, and we start to see the same people that come in on the lives, and people that aren't doing the lives are doing it wrong because it's a lot of fun and you make a lot of friends there. And we're all in different stages of our whiskey journey. We're all in different stages of any journey in our life, right? So I'd say the people that are out there chasing, Wellers and blends, those are the hardest people to convert because they're doing the math on the per ounce. And look, if it was cheap and easy to get other people's whiskey into our bottles, then that'd be one thing, but it isn't and it's not. I think we are very affordable, an annual for getting those 5 kits and the shipping and everything. It's $299.99. If you just get some of the allocated bottles we get, just go buy a few of those. The membership technically pays for itself if you look at it.
Yeah, I think it's a great value. I really do.
Since you started this, for you, Bobby, like what has gone exactly the way you thought it would and maybe better when it came to like inception to all of these steps, all of these, 100 lawyers later, I'm overstating the number of lawyers, but all the different solutions that you found that did not exist when you waded into this, just like you've done in so many different aspects of your professional and personal life. What did hit in a way that your vision really aligned with? And then what totally surprised you, that gobsmacked you as this got up and running and was a surprise, but also better than you ever could have hoped?
That's a great question. In terms of what happened that I expected to happen is that people were going to love the experience. and they were going to organically share it. We have a lot of people that, became members and then they bring on their family and they bring on, and, we'll go on the lives and their parents will be on one of the Zooms and they'll be on the Zoom. And, so there'll be a little bit of everybody that's coming in on the thing. So the communal aspect of it, the forming relationships with all of these craft distilleries, they all become really good friends. Pete Barger from Southern Star, and Southern Distilling for their contracting, massive brand in Statesville, North Carolina. He's become a really good friend. I've mentored his daughters in some capacity. We went golfing with Sean Joseph and Pinhook. So we get to do kind of all sorts of really cool things, and these are small brands that we get to wrap our arms around. And we have bigger plans for restaurant model. We're going to be able to get to do it again. As far as for the stuff that, I would tell you, one of the things you also plan for is that there will be things that you don't plan for. Enclosures are a whole thing in this industry. Shipping alcohol and the carrier leaves it somewhere really hot, for a long time can create a problem. There's some things that you somewhat account for. Our caps, so you don't see a lot of glass bottles in the 50 ml space. And that's for a lot of reasons, because it's expensive. So it's easier to just do those machine cap aluminums on them, right? But yeah, we wanted everything to be high end. And so we built the bottles to really be, and we've got 130 grams of glass. These are hefty bottles. They look like 100 mLs. You would swear that they're more than 50 mLs. Just the heft of it, right? Well, the caps that we had, plastic, and they, plastic malleable and glass isn't. And so what would happen is, not for all the bottles, but for some of it, over time, the tension would loosen. And so all of a sudden you would end up with bottles that are laying flat in this package over time, maybe 5-6 weeks. Some of them would loosen a little bit and whiskey wouldn't come pouring out, but I noticed it in one of them and I'm like, okay, is this happening again? We tested it again. And I'm like, okay, this is literally a company killer. And I didn't know how to solve it. So in our first kits, the letter that we now customize every single letter, but the first 3 or 4 said, "You smell that? That's the smell of American craft whiskey. We sprinkled a little in the box for you," because we didn't really know how to get around that. And a friend of mine has a brand called Coffee Love. And he's like, "Everything about your stuff is great, but your caps look stupid." And he was wrong. But I was like, okay, well, I got to spend 14 cents more a cap to put this metal finish on it so it looks cool. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. But I did it. And it looks better. But what it did was it solved the problem. It kept the plastic from shifting in place. So it actually solved the problem that, there's so many ways a business can fail, through competition, through technology, if you remember during COVID, all those boats that were sitting off the port of LA for months, like that had all our packaging and bottles in it, right? We're dealing with tariffs now. We dealt with the government shutdown. There's government things that happened like every single lineup with COLAs and with TIBs and all this stuff. And when that was shut down, we had to pivot around that last year. The Fred Minnick kit that was supposed to be in December got pushed to March. And the way around it was brands that already had cleared TIBs, which is a transfer and bond, right, to get the whiskey transfer from one location to another to be compliant for all the different tiers, are good for 5 years. So we're able to go to brands from the past. So we called it the best of the best box, right? And what we did is we didn't put the best same thing in the lineup. We took the distillery when we didn't have a lot of members and said, give us something really special. So we put Southern Star back into the lineup with their single malt. Which is phenomenal because they make it like a bourbon. It's phenomenal. And you can only get it if you're at the distillery. Mammoth Distilling out of Traverse City, same thing. There's a bourbon that nobody else had. That you can only get if you were literally at that location and giving people access to these killer things. And I'd say marketing is just another. I went to business school. I was a marketing emphasis. Marketing, what I learned in college is nothing like marketing today. There's so many complicated aspects of it. It's not just, okay, social, Instagram, and pay-per-click Google. There's SEO, and there's CRO, and there's affiliates, and there's influencers, and there's just all these components and moving pieces. And they all, intersect like this really complicated Venn diagram. And that has been an interesting learning curve that I'm still constantly in a state of learning and making sure that I'm hiring the right people that know more than me.
Bobby, I can imagine that today you don't have any problem with the people coming to you clamoring to be part of Blind Barrels. But early on, how did you go about sourcing the barrels? Were you seeking particular mash bills or maturation climates or distillation philosophies? What were you looking for? How did you find the product for your brand?
The main thing we're always looking for is diversity, right? And ideally location, but in mash bill makeup and proof. So first lineup, it was 10th Mountain, out of Aspen. I think they're out of Aspen, Colorado. I think we had more brands out of Colorado than any other brand. We had a brand that we were trying to get that we couldn't get because they didn't understand the dynamics and the pricing of the bulk spirits. So we got Corbin Cash out of Atwater, California. I knew a distillery in San Clemente called Drift Distillery. And Drift, they make 100% wheat whiskey, which is very rare. You don't see that made very often. It's actually really hard to make a wheat whiskey. And he was great because we had to kind of bounce off all these things before you're doing distilleries to like, well, let's run this by you, like in terms of pricing and how it works and what demands we need on the distillery in order to do what we're doing to make sure that we're doing everything the right way. So it's great to have an ally like that. And then Middle West, who's now, Middle West is a really well-respected brand. I don't even remember how we got in contact with them, but they were really easy. Early on, Michael and Danny from Penelope, they were really cool. Just for them to take the time. I mean, they're a massive brand. For them to take the time and to, be in our lineup when we only had like, 300 members, was obviously just amazing and humbling in so many capacities. So at first it was just, the distributor that we use that's in the 3-tier system that we utilize made a lot of introductions for us, which we were grateful for. And then over the years, we would do a lot of reach outs. Some people never get back to us. Now that, we had the Fred Minnick partnership a couple years ago, getting brands to get back to us, obviously much easier. We have a ton of brands that reach out to us all the time. And so we don't choose brands, we choose whiskey. So right now, I know who's in the June lineup. There's still a couple SKUs that we're trying to figure out. So we've already know that we like their products. So it's about now figuring out which of those products is going to be in the lineup and then what order, because we're looking for an experience. We're also trying to make sure that everything in the lineup shines and that, we don't want a bunch of brown sugar, caramel, vanilla bourbons in a row. If you want to get a bourbon kit, great. Now we've had 3 of the ones in the lineup were bourbons, but that's not what we were shooting for. We did a kit once in March of 2024. It was called A League of Their Own because it was all female-owned, operated distilleries, and in one case, all the above, where they source their grain, right? And there was a big magazine that they wanted to do an interview, and I was telling them about that, and the editor got mad at me because she was like, well, isn't that tokenism? And I was like, well, first of all, it's a celebration, number one. Second of all, it could be seen as tokenism if we set out to make a female lineup. But that's not what happened. We usually name the kit after we make it. We just went, oh, wow, these are all female-owned operated thing. And that's why we named it, right? The reality is women footprint in the whiskey industry is massive. It's not some rare thing. It's actually insanely common. So sometimes you'll see something come about like that, like the kit that you guys have, the Inception kit. So we always name it after something kind of pop culture reference. And, we didn't do that in the beginning. Eventually we started doing that. So Inception is all member recommendations. So over all year, members are sending us, talk to this distillery. We love these guys. And then we reach out. The ones that get back to us, they send us samples and then we make that lineup. So we started that. Somebody that recommended something to us ended up in the lineup a few Septembers ago. And then so last September, we made that a members only lineup in terms of like them coming up with the lineup. And we're going to do it again this September. We're going to kind of make it a regular thing.
That's great. Do you have, I'm sure you have a team of other people that taste the product with you to determine what goes into blind barrels, or is it your determining factor that makes the final decision?
I've foisted something in the lineup before, and luckily I've been right every single time. And that's subjective too, right? So I try to give my guys autonomy. It also kind of keeps the blood off of my hands in the sense that, I'm constantly forming relationships with smaller distillers, and some people are sourcing it. And we don't have a problem with someone sourcing. They have to do something to it. They got to blend it. They got to finish it. If they're just white labeling it, that's not an interesting enough story for us, even if, oh, that's really good MGP juice, and it's not a good enough story for us. But I have Christopher Sebastian. He's our chief tasting officer. We have Christian Ridout, who's a co-founder. He was the guy that introduced me to the blinds. And they're very much heavy-handed. They run the tasting experience. So we have a video that walks you through the whole tasting if you can't join one of our lives. And they're heavily involved in really sorting through the lineup. I have, put something in the lineup. So Mendocino, they have this 8-year malted rye that's finished in a cognac barrel that's made in a cognac still from the 1700s that I think is wildly phenomenal. Some people love it. Some people hate it. Like you guys had Cobal's millet grain. It's somewhat polarizing. Now, I always say that you're not going to love everything in the lineup, but you're going to love that you tried it. And so it very much is a collective. And we have some local members that will come by and try things, and just so that way we can kind of figure out if we're making the lineup appropriately, or we'll do something in my backyard and we'll bring in the Pleasant Valley Bourbon Club and we'll put out a bunch of samples and see what people think, and yeah, get feedback. Because sometimes it's the collective. What I've gotten better at is listening to the magnitude, how much somebody specifically likes it. So we had Rocktown in the lineup out of Little Rock, Arkansas. I got to tell you, all their products are phenomenal. And we all had different favorites. And it kind of became, it was almost like Finland voting, where we just all created different magnitudes. And so it was almost like everybody's second place ended up being what we picked. But one of my guys was fawning over this low rye bourbon. And, after revisiting it, it's maybe one of my favorite bottles and things that distillery makes. And I always go, oh man, we should have done that. That one really, and so we're going to put it in our bottle shop, and it'll be a separate thing for Bobby's Stash. So we're going to still push that product out there, and hopefully people will blindly buy that bottle. Every now and again, we had a brand that the order. So Vermont Distilling, it's the only time we've had a flavored whiskey in it. So they're sourcing, but they did a 5% maple infusion. So a lot of times when people do flavoring, it's like, 20%, something that's really heavily, right? And this was very subtle. But the thing is, you throw sugar into something, people love it in a blind. You just do. And the brand that came after them, I felt like they didn't shine as much because of the order. And that's the only time I felt like, oh, we messed up the order. I don't know if there would have been a righter way to do the order, but we tend to go higher in proof. We're not going to put, we've had a 151 26 year that was in the lineup. We've had multiple hazmats that have been in the lineup. And so obviously you're not going to put that in front and shoot everybody's palate out. But we also are trying to educate. There's a lot of people, a lot of members are kind of new on their whiskey journey that are with us. So we're trying to educate them on, look, try it cast strength, but proof it down. The water is going to open up the flavor. Cast strength was not meant to be drank the way it is for everybody. It's meant to proof it down to your liking. So we're constantly trying to educate everybody on the process that, the bourbon chasers love it. We've had a Some Like It hot lineup, and we had one that was called Heat, right? I'm a big Michael Mann fan too, that movie from the 90s with De Niro and Pacino. So, like all cast strength killers, all barrel picks, all things that are allocated are really special. We're always trying to up the level. So like the current lineup, the Fred Minnick lineup, yeah, it's going to be hard to top this one because it's everything in there is off the chart stellar.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm looking forward to it. So what's next for you in the world of whiskey? Do you have any other plans for the future, or are you completely taken up by blind barrels at the time?
Yeah, I'm always got my hands in a few different cookie jars for sure. I'm just a serial entrepreneur and constantly trying to create some things. This is my main focus, obviously, is growing this. We are going to expand into tequila as a membership. We are going to actually do rum first. So we have a lineup, and it's all rum from the continental 48 states. So it's not Virgin Island rums. It's all American rum, which is really cool.
Yeah,
So
very cool.
we're creating a lineup for that. And then we're going to get tequila, and we have a restaurant model. And, we also want to expand into hospitality and hotel rooms and things like that. But the restaurant model, I really feel, is a big part of what we're going to do for the future. So it's something that we need to make sure that we have the right partners in order to do this, because what's happened with COVID is buyer behavior change, consumer behavior change, and everyone's door dashing, right? So they're getting the amount of orders in, but they're not getting the foot traffic. So what is a way that we can really increase this foot traffic back into these restaurants? And now we get to kind of put our arms around these distilleries again, but also these other small businesses in the form of restaurants. So give them a tool that's made us successful, give them the FOMO of the blind tasting, and give them all the engagement elements that we utilize. And hey, do a food pairing night. Go make $7,000 one night. We're not going to take a piece of that. We're going to give them that tool.
Yeah, that sounds very exciting. And if you could figure out how to get this going successfully, you'll be the hero of restaurateurs everywhere in the United States, because we certainly need more foot traffic. So,
I know if you got a good on-premise guy over at Southern Wine and Spirits, let me know, because we're looking for the right partner. We think we have it, but whoever our partners are going to be, they really need to see the vision of what this could be.
Indeed.
Bobby, where can people find you? Where can they find Blind Barrels? Where can they find your future films, your current films? Where online? What are your socials for our audience?
So you can go to blindbarrels.com and you can learn everything about us. If you hit the chat bot, you're going to get me. So if it's 4 a.m. on the West Coast, you may not get me in front of the 3 hours, or 2 hours, like when I get up with my kids. Instagram, Blind Barrels, Twitter, Blind Barrels, everything's Blind Barrels, youtube.com/Blind Barrels. We got all the handles. So you can find us anywhere on any of those capacities. You can reach out anytime. I usually get back emails within 24 hours at the latest if anyone sends any inquiries. And the films, yeah, I think everything's on iTunes. Every now and again, Hulu has The Business of Amateurs or Adjust Your Color. I never really know until like quarterly check comes in. So I never really know where anything is. But yeah, you can pretty much get anything on Amazon and on iTunes for sure.
Great. Well, Bobby, thank you. It's been a fascinating chat with you. You're truly a visionary, and I look forward to following your career as you progress into your next ventures. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us on Served Up, and have a great day.
No, my pleasure. Thank you so much, Kyle and Eric. I really appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Served Up is brought to you by Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits. Produced by Zunu.online. Music by We Killed the Lion can be found on Spotify. Make sure to subscribe to be notified of our future Served Up episodes. Cheers.